My name is Kendall and welcome to my channel. I hope that you've been doing well. I hope that you've been staying warm now that it's getting kind of chilly out. Today we're going to be reading a really fun story that was based way back, more than 100 years ago in 1914. And it's a true story which I will tell you a little bit about after I finish reading. It is called Mailing May, and it is by Michael O'Tunnell, and it was illustrated by Ted Rand. It all started when Ma and Pa promised I could stay a spell with Grandma Mary, who lived 1,000,000 miles away through the rough old Idaho mountains. But when I asked Ma if it was time to go, she just shook her head and sighed real deep. So I tried asking Pa. "No money," said Pa. "Train ticket costs $1.55. May I work all day to make that much? Maybe next year." But I just couldn't wait a whole year. So the next morning, when Ma bundled me in my heavy winter coat and sent me out to play in the snow, I made a beeline for Alexander's department store. Mr. Alexander called his hello from atop a ladder. "I need a job," I said. "I need money for the train." Mr. Alexander smiled as he stepped down to the floor. "A job, is it? I wish I could hire you, May, but all the jobs around here are grown-up jobs, like counting money and lifting heavy cartons." I must have looked mighty sad, because Mr. Alexander reached for a jar of peppermint sticks. The sweet wintry taste didn't do much to cheer me as I slogged my way home. Things only got worse when Pa came back from work that night. He and Ma commenced to whispering and peeking at me off and on. Then they made me go to bed awfully early, which I did not like at all. Next morning, Ma shook me awake while it was still real dark. I was puzzled to see Pa's little traveling bag packed and standing by the door. When I asked where he was going, Ma only smiled and said, "Eat your breakfast." Just then, someone knocked on our front door. Pa opened up to Ma's cousin Leonard. "Come along, May," Pa said, grabbing the suitcase as Ma helped me with my coat. "We're going to the post office with Leonard." He held up his hands as I opened my mouth. "No questions," Pa said with a wink. Ma hugged and kissed me before Pa took my hand and led me out into the dark winter air. Before long, I stood taking in the funny smells of the Grangeville post office. Glue and canvas bags and oiled wooden floors. Meanwhile, Pa marched right up to the postmaster Perkins and said, "Sam, you got some new rules for mailing packages. I know a box can weigh up to 50 pounds nowadays, but what sorts of things can you send?" Mr. Perkins looked at Pa real strange-like as he asked, "What you got in mind, John?" "It's May," said Pa. "We'd like to mail her to Lewiston. Leonard here mans the mail car on the train, as you well know. He can take good care of our package." "Sure thing, Sam," said Leonard. I was flabbergasted by Pa, and so was Mr. Perkins. "Mailing May?" he mumbled, shaking his head. "Let's see. The postal code says not to mail lizards or insects or anything smelly." Mr. Perkins looked at me over his glasses and then sniffed. "Guess you passed the smell test." "But what about girls?" I asked. "Can you mail me?" "Well, the rule book says nothing about children, but it is permissible to mail baby chicks." Mr. Perkins smiled. "Let's find out exactly how much you and your valise weigh." I scrambled up onto the big scale, and Pa set his traveling bag next to me. 48 pounds and 8 ounces. Biggest baby chick on record. Mr. Perkins ran a finger down the chart hanging near the scale and turned to Pa. "To mail May from Grangeville to Lewiston will cost 53 cents. Well, Leonard, looks like you'll be in charge of some poultry on this mail run." Before I knew it, Mr. Perkins has glued 53 cents worth of stamps on the back of my coat, along with a label that read, Miss C. M. Vinegarholtz, 1156 10th Avenue, Lewiston, Idaho. Pa hugged me and told me to be good to Grandma Mary. Then he was gone, and there I was, a package sitting in the post office. Before long, Leonard carted me and the rest of the mail to the train station. The big black steam engine was already waiting, hissing and snorting like a boar hog. The sight made me go all tingly, seeing as I'd never ridden on a train before. After Leonard loaded the mail bags and a few other packages, he called out, "Time to go, May!" And then he helped me up the steel steps. At exactly 7 o'clock, the train chugged away from my home and headed down the mountain. I felt as adventuresome as Daniel Boone. The inside of the mail car was like a little post office, and Leonard got busy right away sorting mail to be dropped off at towns along the way. I curled up nearby the stove to keep warm and watched. Whenever Leonard had a free minute, he'd take me to the door for a look. My, oh my, what sights there were to see! Why, we hung on the edge of the mountainside and we crawled through tunnels. We crossed deep valleys on top of tall, spidery trestles that Leonard called steel on stilts. Then, long about Lacqua Canyon, where the train tracks twist back and forth down the mountain, I began to feel somewhat less adventuresome. Instead, I was feeling dizzy and weak in the stomach. I was about to run to get some fresh air when I heard an angry voice at the door. "Leonard," yelled a man in uniform. "That girl better have a ticket or money to buy one." It was Mr. Harry Morris, the train's conductor. I hid behind Leonard as he explained I was a package, not a passenger. Then he showed Mr. Morris the stamps on my coat. That cranky old conductor slapped his knee and laughed out loud. "I've seen everything now," said Mr. Morris, wiping his eyes. Well, Mr. Morris plumb scared the dizziness right out of me. Even my stomach seemed better, and I started feeling hungry. Leonard said lunch would be at Grandma Mary's. The train made a few more stops at towns like Sweetwater and Joseph before we pulled into the Lewiston Railroad Station. Since this was the end of the line, Leonard had time to be my mail carrier, and we headed for Grandma Mary's place. The second I laid eyes on Grandma Mary, I felt downright warm inside. Ma and Pa had kept their promise, after all, with a little help from the U.S. Post Office. Now I'm going to read you the author's note in the back of the book that explains that this is a real live story that actually happened. This is a true story. On January 1st, 1913, the U.S. Post Office Department introduced domestic parcel post service, and on February 19th, 1914, 5-year-old Charlotte May Piersdorf actually was mailed from Grangeville to Lewiston, Idaho. Indeed, May was classified as a baby chick, and the postage to send her was 53 cents. Her mother's cousin, Leonard Motrell, was the railway postal clerk who manned the mail car between Grangeville and Lewiston. Soon after the train arrived, he delivered May to her grandmother. In those days, there were no decent roads traversing the 75 miles of rugged mountain terrain between Grangeville and Lewiston. Traveling by train, either as a passenger or a package, was the only good way to make the trip. And it was difficult to send message other than mail or telegraph. Apparently, the decision to mail May came about so quickly that there was no time to notify her grandmother, or perhaps May's parents wanted to avoid the additional expense of sending a telegram. In any case, Mary Vinegarholtz had no idea her granddaughter was coming, much less coming by parcel post. Though I fictionalized May's story, the basic historical facts are accurate, thanks to Leonard Motrell, whose 2-page personal account of this story, a clear voice out of the past, solved a number of mysteries for me. I only regret that I missed talking to May herself. She died in 1987. While chasing May's story, I discovered details about Idaho in the early 20th century and about postal history, including mail by rail. However, I discovered that the most important detail has nothing to do with the railway schedules or postal rates, but rather with the wonderful creative ways in which ordinary people solved difficult problems. I think this would be a crazy thing to experience. Not only was she 5 years old, but she went all the way through the mountains on a train. It's also interesting to think that it was only 50 some odd cents to send her on the train while it was $5 for a ticket, so it was a pretty smart thing for her family to do. Well, if you guys liked this story, please let me know. Drop any comments if you have any recommendations or any similar stories like May's. If you guys have any questions either, please let me know. Feel free to drop a like and consider subscribing. It helps me out a lot. Also, feel free to share these with your friends and family. I'm having a lot of fun and I'd love to get some more input. With that being said, I hope that you all treat yourselves, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your month, year, whenever I see you next. I hope that it is wonderful. As always, I will see you soon. Bye!